the internet has opened up everything where, like you're saying, even when I was in school many moons ago, I mean, you only learned what you read in the textbook. Now you go on to the internet, and yeah, some of it is just nothing, okay? It's fake. But there's some stuff there, you look at it, and you have to open your eyes and say, hey, there is a possibility. And there's just so many different cultures around the world who talk about giants. And it goes back before Jesus. So, I mean...
Oh, absolutely. Way before.
Yeah.
We're talking. In the times of the dinosaur, that was one of the theories that we know the dinosaurs were wiped out by a huge asteroid, and all the sun was blocked out, and that's if you're into the science, that's what you believe.
Oh yeah.
But they also believe that there are some species that they correlate back to that time that are much smaller nowadays, and they believe that that's the same theory as the giants, with the conditions on Earth being able to support that type of life. As conditions on the planet changed, eventually the dinosaurs would have faded away anyway.
Well, actually, you take man, for example. If you go back around the 1400s, men, you'd been a freak if you were 5'9", because most people back in the 1400s, even like 1440, 1470, all around that range, the average height of a man was around 5'2". Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
and look at there was a graveyard. They call it the Graveyard of Giants in China, where there was up to 5,000-year-old skeletons measured at 6 foot plus.
Oh yeah.
That's big back then.
Oh yeah. If somebody 5'2" and somebody like 6'5", I mean that would be scary. But how about like if you go back to like the Greek times, those average heights were like between about 4'7" to about 5 foot tall was a tall person. So you talk about the Greek time, the Egyptian times. Okay, I mean somebody 8-10 feet tall while you're pushing 5. That's 5 feet taller. That would be hell of a scary encounter.
Well, someone with with the people with the average height of, you're saying 4'10" to 5 foot, and then all of a sudden there's bones of someone being 8 feet. Like, whoa, how did that happen? Why is there 20 people here that are 4 feet, and then all of a sudden there's one person here that's 8 feet tall? Wow. How is that possible?
Well, some of those
would that be possible?
Kevin, some of those skeletons were over 10 feet, 13, 14 feet. So, I mean...
And just because they found one doesn't mean there's not more.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it seemed, too, like when, technology was really advancing around the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and even in the 50s, that's when they started finding a lot of these skeletons. And it's really strange, too. I mean, they got debunked as much as possible by the government.
The government wants to debunk anything that doesn't fit into a neat little box that can be explained. You can't put it in a box and set it up on the shelf and watch it. The government doesn't want to talk about it.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't exist.
Yes, so that's the easiest way to not talk about it. It doesn't exist.
Yeah,
and when we look back at ancient times and we see references to kings and gods, gods. Well, don't you think somebody that appeared before you that was twice your height, you would think would be a god?
Well, what do you think about like Sasquatch or something that popped up in California back in the 60s? Like, do you think that was like an actual hoax, or do you think that was real or not? I mean, do you think
there's reports of Yeti, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them, all over the world. Yeah. It has been for forever and ever.
Yeah, like the Himalayas.
Yep.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
My question for any of you listeners out there that are listening: Do you think that Sasquatch that was recorded back in the 60s were real or was real?
Well, Kevin, I'm going to tell you something like I told Ryan last week or the week before. I ran across something, and I can tell you to this day it was not a bear. I can't say it was a Bigfoot. It could have been a giant. I don't know. All I know, it was huge, and it was smart enough to know where we parked our car and beat us there. So that tells me there's other things out there. So if I seen something like this, my eyes are open. Yes, there could have been giants, and maybe right now walking this earth somewhere, they can be some giants.
Like living in national parks or something?
No, I'm talking way out where, where man hasn't quite conquered everything yet.
Bumfuck Egypt, you talking about? Or
where
excuse
very
my language.
few feet have traveled.
Yeah. In the Amazon, there's tribes in the Amazon too that are really short, like 4'6", 4'3", under 5 foot. And then there's tribes around the Amazon where they're over 6 foot, 7 foot tall. So I mean,
well, and they found bones in Ecuador, as recently as 2013, I believe.
Right.
That they're trying to say they thought to date 600 years ago. I'm guessing they're going to be a lot more than that, because most of the bones that have been found that are known date back thousands or hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, my question for you is, what do you think about the data analysis on data checking on bones and stuff? Do you think it's you mean carbon
dating? Yes.
Do you think
carbon dating? Carbon dating. The problem with carbon dating
do you think it's
the
like
life
accurate?
of the Earth, it's fairly accurate, but in our lifetime, we're not but a millisecond in the history of the planet. So in our thought of in our perspective of time, it's not super accurate, because it can be a range of thousands of years. They could say, well, this is between 5,000 and 10,000
Sorry
years
about
old.
the noise.
Well, that sounds like a huge range, but in the scope of the planet, it's a pretty narrow range.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's just it's all in how you look at it.
Well, yeah, and too, also what is interesting too, and if I disconnect you, I'll call you right back. I just
his phone dropped.
I dropped the phone system. Okay,
but he's right back on though. He's back on though.
Okay, I got it fixed. What goes also, not just the skeletons they found, but some of the artifacts they have found. That the artifacts would have been impossible for me or you or anybody else even to begin to even hold it in our hand, let alone pick it up.
Right. I mean, huge, massive tools.
Yeah.
And that brings to light, things I didn't realize. Every time I've ever heard about Stonehenge, I've heard, well, it's aliens, it's aliens, it's aliens. Well, you know what? It makes a lot more sense that it was giants.
That's a possibility, yes.
And there's a lot of belief in that. And there's other places on the planet that have formations similar to those, not identical, but similar to those.
Oh yeah.
And they're nowhere related to each other.
Well, you have to look at too, like in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even the 70s, okay? Before the internet, okay? How would somebody in China or somebody in South America or somebody in Nova Scotia, come up with the same type of story about giants and finding bones, when it'd be really hard to communicate that information like today?
Yeah,
I mean, today I can get on Facebook, right, and say this, and a certain amount of people are going to believe it, and it's going to spread. Right. It'll really spread fast. Within a couple of hours all across the world. I mean,
hours,
minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that is super fast. It would be and that's part of the reason that we have a lot of the stuff we have today, which I think is the real fake news.
Yeah. The debunkers,
because of the internet, because of social media. And I'm not knocking those things. They're great tools if used correctly, but there are people people out there that all they want is their 10 minutes of fame, and they'll do almost whatever it takes to get it.
Well, I'm looking.
So if it means lying about something, that's what they'll do.
Well, I'm looking at a picture right now. The picture is from 1951 of this expedition on Mount Everest. There was some alleged footprints from a Yeti, and this footprint, it was bigger than an ice pick. Okay, well, not as big as the ice pick. I'm talking about as big as the metal part. And let's see here. And anyways,
yeah, but if you look at that picture, it looks like that's 3 or 4 toes.
well,
Yeah, and it doesn't. Well, again, that doesn't fall in the classification, Kevin, of a giant.
well, look how big the footprint is, though.
No, it just proves that there's different species that it probably exist and has
Well, the
existed on Earth.
subspecies of
Because most of the footprints of so-called giants that they found have been 5 and 6 toed, I believe.
Oh yeah, and some of the remains what they have found, like the leg bones alone were almost as tall as me and you. So I mean, again, that's kind of really putting it out there. But I mean, they have found skeletons, and some of them are actually in a few museums across the world. And they're not fake. And how do you, debunk something when you have skulls that are about 3 times the size of a human or 4 times the size of a human skull?
Right. And an example of a picture that I think is fake. There's one out there where there's this giant skull next to a large piece of machinery, and the machinery is dwarfed by the skull.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There's
That's just no. That's not what I'm thinking when I think giant.
Well, like you mentioned, there's people out there that want to make a name for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to mention the talk show, but I used to be really into listening to talk shows for 20-some years on one particular show. Some of the guests he had, that people would actually believe him, the guest, to a certain period of time. But after all these things never transpired or, never came about, it debunks them as, what. And, there's going to be a certain amount of people that are going to say, oh, look what I found. And here's a picture of a skull, right? It's fake.
Right.
They got into Photoshop. They're good at Photoshop. They're faking it the same as they fake pictures of UFOs and Bigfoot and stuff like that. They want to be, a idol for a little while. And that's all they are. They became popular for a little while at a time, but down the road, they're nobody.
In South Africa, there is a footprint that's approximately 4 or 5 foot long. It's actually stood up. The tectonic plate action of the Earth has actually taken this preserved piece of stone that was mud at one time and slowly pushed it up through the crust, and it's sticking up with a footprint.
Oh, yeah.
5 toes, the same shape as a human's foot. And stuff like that. And that one was discovered in 1930, 31, right in there somewhere.
Yeah, and
it's still there to this day.
Well, another thing too. Look how much they would have to eat, and that's another thing. Like again, when man started showing up in the picture, and you have giants. I mean,
competing with food.
Yeah,
Food.
look at the Indians and the buffaloes. It didn't take long for us humans to almost wipe out, extinct a whole, animal species. I mean, so I mean,
over greed.
Yeah,
over greed.
Yeah,
and I don't think greed was quite, in the days of the giants and early man, we hadn't discovered greed yet.
Yeah.
There wasn't that the gold or whatever that man modern man is damn near destroyed lots of things in the name of greed.
Yeah. Well, look at the Earth right now.
Yeah.
But could you imagine how much they would eat? I was reading where they could sit there and eat a horse, or they could eat a sheep. Like sit down and one of them would eat the whole thing. I mean, they had enormous appetite. Of course, they would be.
Well, you'd have to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, here's man, right?